In this video, I'm going to cover the topic of pressure fermentation, and in particular, pressure fermentation using a Corny Keg. Now, I have to do it this way this time around because my other gear is tied up with a different batch of beer, and I needed to brew this for an event coming up. So I thought, well, I have plenty of extra kegs around, why not give this technique a try? So what I'm going to do in this video is give you the specifics of exactly what I did. I'm going to talk about how much beer to brew, what's the batch size, what kind of yeast, you see that discussed quite often, how long to ferment, how much pressure during the fermentation, what about the ambient temperature, what is it, how to dry hop in this kind of configuration. I'll do a completely closed transfer when it comes time to move the beer from this keg to the serving keg. And finally, the last thing I'll talk about, any special equipment that's needed. It's really very simple, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to see how easy you could actually give this a shot. So let's get started. I brewed the beer the other day and transferred it to the keg. Now the amount of beer that went into the keg was 4 gallons. 4 gallons within this 5-gallon keg. And the reason for that, of course, is we need headspace for the krausen to grow. We don't want things pushing up against the lid so hard that it actually tries to ooze right out. So the other thing I did is that I wanted to make sure the fermentation actually started and that things were good to go to seal it up and start the pressure process. So what I did is initially just put on a standard blow-off tube. Once I saw there was activity in my little cup of sanitizer, I popped that blow-off tube off and put on the spunding valve. Now, I wasn't sure how much pressure would build up how quickly, so I basically turned this virtually off. I had it so that there would be no pressure escaping from the keg whatsoever, and I was surprised. Overnight, I already had built up about 17 pounds of pressure. So I thought, okay, that's plenty of pressure, maybe a little more than I actually wanted to try, being the first time through this. So I gently turned down the pressure, probably over the course of an hour, just stepping it down gradually so that, again, the krausen wouldn't really try to explode up, and dialed it down to about 10 pounds. And so that's where I've been sitting for the last few days. I plan on doing the entire fermentation at that 10-pound limit. So let me just touch quickly on the yeast I used, because you see a lot of confusing things out there as far as the susceptibility of stress to the yeast based on pressure. Well, it seems that after reading quite a bit of information in this area, that really is kind of a non-issue except for very specific yeast types. What I'm using in this particular batch of beer is a San Diego Super from White Labs, and I see no problem or any risk in using that particular type of yeast. The other thing I'll comment on right now is my ambient temperature. If you've seen my other videos, you know in the conical setting, I have a cooling coil, a glycol chiller, you know, the full 9 yards, so to speak. Out here it's just a keg sitting next to the garage door because it's the coolest part in my garage, and the ambient temperature is probably about 64 degrees. I also do not have any active temperature control, so it's just susceptible to any kind of temperature fluctuations. So I'm all set. I'm going to let this continue to ferment out. I'll take a gravity reading, and what I plan on doing with that is just putting a party tap onto my output here and take a little beer and see what we got. I'll let you know how the fermentation's coming along, again, how long it took, and we'll get to the dry hopping section, which I think is going to be quite interesting to do. So that's it. That's the kickoff to this project. Okay, so I brewed the beer on Sunday, and now it's Friday afternoon. So I'm ready to go ahead and take a sample, see where my gravities are, and report that back to you. So what I'm going to do to achieve that is I'm going to take just a standard picnic tap, click it on the outpost, and take a little sample in a glass. So one thing I want to bring up is in a lot of videos you see somebody going to do a practice like this. They take their SAR stand, they give it a spray, and they say, okay, good, I'm going to hook it up. No. Star sand requires a certain contact time. If that's all you do, all you've done is get things wet. You really haven't done anything as far as sanitizing. With this one, I left it in my bucket full of star sand for 5 or 10 minutes while I was doing other things. So now it's ready to go. So make sure to give yourself enough time with your star sand. Little gold nugget there. Let's go ahead and pop it on. A little glass here. And we'll take our sample. That should do it. So you can see by virtue of the pressure fermentation, the beer is carbonated. That's kind of nice. Looks pretty good. Smells pretty good. Let me get my refractometer and we'll take a look to see what the numbers really are. Oh, wow, okay. We're almost there. Right now I'm reading about 8.5 bricks. The conversion on this with my starting gravity would put me about at 10-15. So we're ready to dry hop this. I'm glad I checked it. So what I want to do, let the pressure off very slowly. Make sure the krausen doesn't rise up and push into the lid and try to come out through the outposts. I'll go ahead and add the dry hop, put the lid back on, and then pressurize it back to where it is around that 10 psi. Let it sit for a few days, and we'll be ready to transfer. Okay, so I've bled the pressure off the keg. So right now, 0 pressure in here. I'm gonna pop open the lid, add about 1.25 ounces of laurel hops, and close it back up, put some pressure on it, and let it sit a few days before we do the cold crash. I'll cross my fingers, here we go. Double check here. Yeah, the pressure is definitely out. Add them right in. Lid back on. Okay, so the cold crash is over, and now it's time for the transfer. So let me tell you what I've got going. I brought the keg in and charged it back up to 10 pounds. In the cold crash, it probably dropped down to almost 5 pounds. So I have 10 pounds in it now, and the keg down below there, that little 3-gallon guy, he also had 10 pounds, but I used the CO2 in there to purge both the gas line and the beer line coming up. So now, theoretically, I've got more pressure here than I do down there. So as soon as I snap on the liquid out from the fermenting keg, it should start transferring into the bottom keg there. After a minute or two, I'll snap the CO2 from there back up to here, and you'll see that closed loop process where beer flowing out creates more pressure there, moves the pressure up here, and perpetuates the process. It should be interesting. Now the other thing is, you'll notice when I zoom in a bit, I have that little keg on a scale. So I can make sure the transfer is still occurring. I can see how quickly it's occurring, and also I'll know when to stop. Because if you remember, I have 4 gallons of beer here, and that's a 3-gallon keg, and I really don't want to overflow it. So all right, so it's running now, and you can see here how slow it's really moving. It's 1 pound. So this whole process probably take almost 15 minutes. I should start a timer, and I'll let you know how long it does take. Okay, so the transfer's over. The time it took was almost 35-40 minutes for my 3 gallons. It started off at a better rate, maybe 7-8 minutes per gallon. But as the fermenting keg got lower and lower, the transfer rate slowed down. In fact, I actually gave it just a little shot of CO2 towards the end to keep it moving. Overall, though, I'd say a success. Completely closed loop, which is nice. Not using any new CO2 to complete the transfer. Not that that's a big deal, but it's a little extra, I'll say. So let's go ahead and take a little taste, see what we came up with. So there we go. Nicely carbonated. Smells good. Pretty good. Tends to be on the sweet side. A little bit of late bitterness in it. The Laurel hop's unique. I'm glad I tried it. I'd say this beer is really pretty good. So once I finish all this stuff, I'll get to the special equipment that I used, and really, it's very simple. Okay, so let's talk about the special equipment that was used, and it's really not much. First off, we've got the spunning valve. This is something that's kind of handy to have in general for a lot of different tasks. For this particular one though, mandatory. Really nothing more than a gauge, an adjustable regulator. It can be put like I have here on a hose assembly, or you see a lot of times directly connected to the kegs. Doesn't really matter, does the same function, not so bad. The other thing was for the keg itself, since I had a lot of yeast that's going to fall out, the dry hop for sure, I used a floating dip tube. So the whole point of this is it's going to float on top, let all that stuff fall to the bottom, and you can transfer out your cleaner beer. It worked okay. Some people just chop off the dip tube, give you a lot of clearance from the bottom. That could probably work too. This I'm going to work with a little bit more. I think there's a promise for it, but my results this time around were not great. So a bit of a mess to clean up there. Sorry, that's it. Everything else is probably stuff that you already have. So thanks for watching. Give this process a shot. It's kind of fun. The beer came out pretty good, and we'll catch up with you later.